The city of Minneapolis recently settled with the family of George Floyd to the tune of $27 million. The number is historic, and as expected, it is corrupting the trial of Derek Chauvin, the police officer involved in the death of George Floyd. Many people were concerned that with the city issuing the settlement, it was effectively saying we admit fault. And while settlements aren't necessarily an admission of guilt, to the public, they basically are. The city is paying $27 million to this family. Sounds like you're saying you owe them this money. It may just be that the city is concerned that if they don't pay this out, the riots will be more damaging than the payout, perhaps. Either way, it's tainted the jury pool. And now we're learning 2 jurors who were already selected have been removed after they learned about the $27 million settlement. Judge seems to be rather upset. And it seems that many of these jurors will not be able to be impartial now that they've learned the city has settled with the family. And how could they be? Now, part of the settlement, one of the more shocking aspects of it, is that $500,000 will be going to George Floyd Square, an autonomous zone set up by far left extremists where police are not allowed in, where people have actually died, and where locals are complaining about the occupation. It's not entirely clear where the money will be going. They just say the community, so it may very well go to the families that live in this area, perhaps. But if the area is under occupation by extremists and the cops can't get in, I'm not entirely sure that these individuals will be able to use that money in any meaningful way, save hiring professional security to come in and clear out the area. But there are many people in Minneapolis who are concerned about this new autonomous zone. It's actually been there for quite some time. And the potential for violence should this trial end up in Derek Chauvin's favor. The reality, I think, is that no matter what happens in this trial, there are going to be riots. The activists in the city, in Minneapolis, who were getting raucous, and the rioters who were burning down buildings, they want first-degree murder charges for Chauvin. They don't want second, third, or manslaughter. But that's what he's being charged with, and he likely will get off. The defense is now asking that the jury be allowed to see evidence from a prior arrest where George Floyd actually swallowed some opiates, so they report. And they also want to point out to the jury that George Floyd did have drugs in his system. Many are suggesting that as soon as the jury finds out that fact, well, Derek Chauvin is going to be found not guilty. And when that happens, the city will burn once again. The riots we saw last year were intense, some of the worst riots we have ever seen in this country. $2 billion in damages, but that was just the insurance cap. It's likely that the damages actually exceed $2 billion. And the people of Minneapolis know it's going to get bad. The ramifications of these riots was the defunding of police. And it seems quite nonsensical. People go around burning down your city. So you say, OK, we'll give you what you want. We'll take away law enforcement. Now that the city's police department has been crippled, we are looking at a perfect storm, a tainted jury pool, meaning that there may be a mistrial. The defense is already calling for a delay. That may result in riots. And then you get the trial restarted later on. More riots when the results are not favorable to the extremists. You also have a weakened police force and a city desperate, spending millions to recruit new officers. Many people don't want to work in the city as a cop because of what's going on. It's going to be, in my opinion, way worse than we saw last time. Now, maybe it won't be national. Maybe it won't be the apocalypse, but I certainly think Minneapolis is going to be feeling the pain no matter what happens. The settlement issued by this city has tainted the jury pool, and now there is a request to delay the trial, and it might actually happen. Let's jump into this news. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com, become a member to get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast. Yesterday, we had Lieutenant Colonel Alan West on the show. And in our exclusive segment, we talk about wokeness, critical race theory, and how it impacts politics in this country. I think you'll rather enjoy what Colonel West has to say. So go to timcast.com, become a member, but don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Let's get into this news. 2 jurors dropped from Chauvin trial after $27 million settlement, reports 7 News. They say a judge on Wednesday dismissed 2 jurors who had been seated for the trial of a former Minneapolis police officer in George Floyd's death over fears that the jurors had been tainted by the city's announcement last week of a $27 million settlement to Floyd's family. Hennepin County Judge Peter Cahill recalled 7 jurors and was questioning each one in turn to find out what they knew about the settlement and whether it affected their ability to serve. Former officer Derek Chauvin's attorney, Eric Nelson, had requested the recall. Cahill was being careful to ask jurors if they had heard the news of the settlement without giving details, saying only that there had been extensive media coverage about developments in a civil suit between the city of Minneapolis and the family of George Floyd, and asking if they had been exposed to it. The first dismissed juror said he had heard about the settlement. I think it will be hard to be impartial, he said. That sticker price obviously shocked me, the second juror dismissed said. He said he thought he could set the news aside but wasn't sure. And after a long pause, Cahill dismissed him. Cahill retained 5 other jurors. Now, some people have suggested that these jurors just wanted to get out of jury duty. I don't think so. The judge didn't ask them, hey, they got $27 million. What do you think about that? He said, have you heard anything about a civil suit? And a couple people said, oh, yeah. And that number is massive. $27 million. I'm sorry. I don't blame these people for saying that they can't be impartial. The city's move has corrupted their own trial. And I would not be surprised if this judge eventually just says, you know what? We're going to have to delay this. We're going to have to wait until the dust settles. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a push for a mistrial because the city took action. It's the government that are prosecuting this officer. And now the city has effectively tainted any possibility of a fair trial. They say, Nelson had called the timing of the announcement in the middle of jury selection profoundly disturbing to the defense and not fair. He has also requested a delay in the trial, which Cahill is considering. 9 people had been selected for the jury, including 7 before Friday's settlement was announced. If they delay this trial, I think there will be riots. There's already been massive protests where thousands of people marched to the streets, but they didn't get that bad. And it's probably because Chauvin is on trial. But if they delay this, you will see mass protests. Maybe those won't get that bad. But if they cause a mistrial or if they give a favorable outcome in any way to Chauvin, then it will. They say jury selection through Tuesday had been proceeding faster than expected. Cahill has set opening statements for March 29th at the earliest, but dismissal of some of the jurors already seated risked imperiling that date. The questioning came at the request of former Officer Derek Chauvin's attorney, Eric Nelson, who called the timing of last week's announcement by city leaders in the middle of jury selection profoundly disturbing and not fair. Nelson had also requested a delay in the trial, which Cahill is considering. Cahill has set opening statements for March 29th at the earliest, but dismissal of some of the jurors already seated could imperil that date. 9 jurors had been seated through Tuesday, including 5 who are white, 1 who is multiracial, 2 who are black, and 1 who is Hispanic. The jurors include 6 men and 3 women and range in age from their 20s to their 50s. 14 people, including 2 alternates, are needed. Chauvin is charged with murder and manslaughter in the May 25th death of Floyd, a black man who was declared dead after Chauvin pressed his knee against his neck for about 9 minutes. Floyd's death, captured on a widely seen bystander video, set off weeks of sometimes violent protests across the country and led to a national reckoning on racial justice. On Tuesday, the 2 sides skirmished over whether evidence of Floyd's 2019 arrest in Minneapolis should be allowed at trial. We'll get into that. And I want to walk through this, and I want to show you some of these tweets. For one, we have this from Jack Posobiec. I'm not entirely sure who Juror 51 is, perhaps one of the individuals who was dismissed. Juror 51 admits she cannot be impartial after hearing the city awarded George Floyd's family a record $27 million. I agree. I think this is messed up. I think we're in trouble. Here's the news on the request for a delayed trial, which we just did hear a little bit of, but let's get into detail. NBC News reports Derek Chauvin's attorney wants trial delayed over the $27 million settlement. The judges agreed to question the 7 jurors already selected to ask about their views on the settlement. So this is from March 15th, before we learned these jurors were being dismissed. They say, an attorney for the former police officer charged in George Floyd's death said Monday he is gravely concerned that the announcement of a $27 million settlement for Floyd's family makes it impossible for his client to get a fair trial. Defense attorney Eric Nelson asked for a continuance and raised the possibility of renewing his previously unsuccessful motion to move Derek Chauvin's trial to another city. I am gravely concerned with the news that broke on Friday, Nelson said, adding that the settlement announcement has incredible potential to taint the jury pool. We now know that is quite literally what just happened. Chauvin was correct. Nelson was correct. Not Chauvin. The lawyer for Chauvin was correct. Prosecutor Steve Schleicher said the state had no control over Mayor Jacob Fry and the city council, who announced the settlement on Friday. Well, that may be, but this is still the government. This may be a state prosecutor. They're saying the state has no control over what the city does, but it is still the people versus Derek Chauvin, isn't it? This is a public criminal trial, in which case, whether the city coordinated with the state prosecutors or not, it's still indicative of a problem that the state and the city, the government, it is the people versus Derek Chauvin. Now, I want to go through what's happening now. Actually, before we get into the $500,000 for the Antifa occupation, I want to highlight this story from The Hill. Derek Chauvin's attorney asked for jury to see evidence from 2019 George Floyd arrest. Before we read it, I want to clarify a few very important things. The initial story I was reading mentioned that Floyd died after Derek Chauvin had his knee on his neck for several minutes. For those that aren't familiar, there was actually an image released by the defense showing that Minneapolis police, in fact, train their officers to do this, which is why many suspect murder charges will not stick. That would imply the intent to do harm, which resulted in the death of Floyd. There could potentially be manslaughter that, while in a negligent manner, George Floyd died. That may actually work out simply because Chauvin was on his neck for 9 minutes. However, the defense has also pointed out that there were drugs in Floyd's system. And they believe that as soon as the jury finds that out, it will not prove the innocence of Derek Chauvin. However, it will present reasonable doubt as to the cause of death of George Floyd, in which case you may see an acquittal on all counts. Now, this development is rather significant. Yesterday at 3:53, The Hill reported defense attorneys for ex-Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin are asking for the jury in his trial over George Floyd's death to see evidence from Floyd's arrest from 2019. Eric Nelson, the lead attorney for Chauvin, said that the similarities from the two arrests are incredible, according to Reuters, adding that it's the exact same behavior in the two incidents almost exactly 1 year apart. Floyd was arrested in May 2019, an incident during which he reportedly became distressed as an officer pointed a gun at him. During that arrest, Floyd swallowed several opioid pills as police approached him. According to the Associated Press, Chauvin's defense is planning to argue that Floyd's drug use contributed to his death. Now, it is a fact, however, the medical examiner said it did contribute, was not the overt, the absolute cause of, though. Prosecutor Matthew Frank, however, argued that the defense wants to use the 2019 arrest to try and depict Floyd as a bad person. Frank blasted the desperation of the defense to smear Mr. Floyd's character, to show that what he struggled with, an opiate addiction, like so many Americans do, is really evidence of bad character, according to the AP. Hennepin County Judge Peter Cahill previously rejected an attempt to tell the jury about the previous arrest, but heard new arguments Tuesday. He said he would take at least a day to consider the request. Floyd was pronounced dead May 25th. We know about this. They say an autopsy from the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office from the day of Floyd's death showed trace amounts of fentanyl and methamphetamine in his system. However, the drugs were not listed as his cause of death. Chauvin is on trial for second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. Nelson on Monday also asked the court to pause and relocate the trial after the city of Minneapolis reached a $27 million settlement with Floyd's family, and that we understand. Now, according to my understanding, based on my understanding, they didn't say his cause of death was the drugs, but they said a combination of restraint, a heart condition, and drug use played a role in the death of George Floyd. What you need to understand about any one of these charges is that they need only reasonable doubt. They don't need to definitively prove Derek Chauvin did nothing wrong. They need to actually just give doubt to the jurors. I have to be honest. While I'm not in this case, I likely won't see much of the evidence presented by the prosecution or the defense. There are certain things we do know the jurors won't. Notably, the judge seems not to want to allow the defense to show the jurors what happened with George Floyd in May of 2019. But I think that is particularly important in understanding what happened. I suppose it does make sense not to allow this evidence because it's nothing to do with what happened on that day with Derek Chauvin. And the question is whether or not Chauvin was negligent or acting with malintent or the intent to harm. I suppose it matters on a more personal level for all of us trying to understand what's really going on, however. This George Floyd individual absolutely did not deserve to die. And I'm sad it happened, and I think most people are. But if it's true that he was taking these drugs and had a heart condition, then I think that creates reasonable doubt. In which case, Chauvin will likely be found not guilty, be acquitted of all charges, and then we can see the rioting. Which brings me back to this story from NBC. NBC highlighting the $27 million settlement with George Floyd's family point out the city council unanimously approved the settlement Friday after meeting in private. It includes a $500,000 donation to the community around the intersection of 38th and Chicago Avenue, now known as George Floyd Square, where police confronted Floyd last May 25th after a convenience store clerk claimed he had tried to use a counterfeit $20 bill to buy cigarettes. A bystander recorded the video, and we know what happened next. George Floyd did not deserve to die, and I think that's something everyone should recognize. Now, as to whether the city should be giving out this money is an entirely different question. And it's a question of whether or not the city thinks there's going to be riots unless they bend the knee. Ladies and gentlemen, from the Star Tribune, near George Floyd Square, revolution by day, de-evolution by night. The neighbors surrounding the site of George Floyd's death in South Minneapolis are asking for prayers and help. Now, perhaps this $500,000 will be the assistance these people need as they are forcefully occupied by far left extremists. I'm sure there are many people there who like the occupation, and I know there are many there who don't, because we've already seen locals speak out to the press. A young man apparently was shot and killed. The police and medical assistants were unable to get into the zone to render aid. This individual who was shot had to be carried out and unfortunately didn't make it. The Star Tribune reports, as neighbors of 38th Street and Chicago Avenue, also known as George Floyd Square or the Autonomous Zone, we are witnessing a revolution by day and a de-evolution by night. Prayer gatherings canceled, rallies canceled, visitors arriving with flowers in hand, only to retreat to their cars when greeted by the sound of gunshots. Neighbors ducking for cover behind our houses, children in tow. The spiritual health of our community, the feeling of being connected to something larger than ourselves is collapsing. Here's an account of some of the events of the past 10 days on one block adjacent to George Floyd Square, where police are met by hostile groups when responding to our repeated 911 calls. March 6th, 5:45 p.m. A 30-year-old volunteer is killed in the zone by gunshot. People in the zone are seen picking up shell casings and throwing them into the city garbage, loading the gunshot victim into a car to drive him to the hospital. 8:20 p.m. Neighbors call 911 again as multiple shots ring out. Children listen. March 7th, 6 garages along our alley are hit by gunfire, one with its owner inside. A car crashes through a fence into a family's backyard. An 18-month-old had been playing by the fence minutes earlier. 5 p.m. 30 shots hit cars and the windows and siding of at least one house, narrowly missing residents watching TV. Parents and children out biking and walking on a sunny day duck behind houses. Children watch bullets kicking up dust in the street. A zone leader visits a bullet-riddled house to comfort the family, while others from the zone are observed picking up shell casings behind her. March 8th, 2:30 p.m., multiple shots fired. A man is photographed perched atop Cup Foods with an assault rifle on a tripod. Children cry. Zone medics are offered to visit neighbors and provide mental health support to those being traumatized. 9:50 p.m., 30 shots ring out. A person complains to a neighbor that the neighbor has parked too close to the person's car. A zone occupant with no connection to the other parties fires multiple shots into the neighbor's car and house. The neighbor, a military veteran, is in the driver's seat and recognizes an assault rifle with a 30-round clip. I'm going to stop right now and just say, Star, first of all, it's not an assault rifle unless you literally mean they have full auto or select fire capabilities, and it's not a clip, it's a magazine. Unless he's operating something from World War II, perhaps. The shooter walks back into the zone. Four police squads caravan through and meet the neighbors nearby. 10:16 p.m. A second 911 call provides a description of the shooter, who remains in the area appearing to wait for some target. Police have just received a call about a teen and adult shot 2 miles away. Resources exhausted. The police do not respond to our call. The shooter in the zone walks away. 10:45 p.m. Third 911 call for the night. As some neighbors are picking up shell casings. People near the first statue in the zone repeatedly yell, "Get the F out of here." Then a gun is fired from near the first statue. 4 men come out of the zone to tell the neighbors they weren't shooting at you. The neighbors ask if they are zone security and are told no, but one man reports he has his gun. Neighbors ask how to protect themselves and are told the best thing to do is fill the street corners with garbage containers to block off our streets. This is insane. There's more. March 12th, 5 p.m. A neighbor trying to access his home is met in the alley by 3 young teen girls leaving the zone, pushing a car with no license plate. They say they ran out of gas. They are asked who the driver is, no answer. They are asked whose car it is, no answer. They are asked where they are trying to go, and they point to a home. A woman comes out of the home and tells them they can't park there. They walk away, abandoning the car. While a neighbor is reporting the abandoned car, she observes a group of well-dressed people being followed by reporters. The neighbor walks into the zone to find attorney Benjamin Crump and the family of George Floyd with Minneapolis City Council, Vice President Andrea Jenkins. They are greeting businesses owned by people of color who are being impacted by the loss of business in the zone. They inform the group they are giving $500,000 to the business owners. 2 more vehicles with no plates or temporary stickers pass by driving inside the zone. 9:15 p.m. 30 shots from inside the zone. 1 police squad car arrives. 10:20 p.m. Shooting suspects from another part of the city drive at high speed down our street with multiple squad cars chasing them, along with a helicopter. Fleeing vehicle blows through stop signs and lights. They eventually enter the zone and surrender as a group of zone occupants emerge and shout at the police and each other. Children are told to go back to sleep. They write, "We live here because we love our neighbors. We know that it is good for all of us to be part of something larger than ourselves. We want to live in a community with people of different races, life experiences, and faiths. The beautiful thing about Minneapolis, the economic driver of Minnesota, is its desire to fight all that has dispirited us, not freeze or flee in the face of it. But we are also watching neighbors move 20% in the last year, another 20% preparing. 38th and Chicago is not the only under-resourced part of the city. We recognize that children in North Minneapolis have spent decades listening, watching, crying, questioning, trying to sleep. We will join our neighbors to the north, Don and Sandra Samuels, who last week organized Healing Our City, a virtual prayer tent because prayers are needed. We also will continue to call 911 as the de-evolution continues. We are unsure when help is coming. Monica Nilsson lives in Minneapolis. The article was submitted on behalf of a collection of neighbors adjacent to George Floyd Square. In what way is any of that honoring the memory of George Floyd, bettering the community, helping people fight against oppression? It's not. Things are objectively worse for the people who live in this area. So perhaps it's a very good thing. They're going to be receiving $500,000. I made an incorrect assessment from the initial reports on the Timcast IRL podcast when it said that they were giving the money to the memorial itself, or at least that was what I believed it to be the case, as opposed to the businesses surrounding it. I think these people do deserve assistance. And more importantly, I believe they deserve a police force that can protect them from what's going on. Unfortunately, extremists are exploiting the circumstances at 38th in Chicago and in Minneapolis. They're trying to put Derek Chauvin in prison for what happened. Perhaps a jury will find that is necessary. But we must admit that with this case and the multiple officers who have been charged, you are going to see a drain on resources and police officers not wanting to help these communities anymore. So what do we do? When an officer takes a life, for any reason, there must be an inquiry to understand why it happened. These are individuals that we've entrusted with the power of the state to use lethal force and non-lethal force and less lethal force. That means sometimes people will die. And that means we as a city, as a state, as a country, need to ask the question, why is it that those we empowered took a life? Sometimes, Unfortunately, it needs to happen. And that's the sad reality of existence. I, for one, staunchly oppose the death penalty. But when you're dealing with someone in the street, somebody who may be armed and want to cause harm to an officer, someone who may want to hurt innocent people, the police need to be able to deal with that problem and use lethal, less lethal, and even non-lethal force. Sometimes it escalates to lethal force. It's not so simple. I think it's sad that this is the way the world is, but I'm a mature adult who realizes it's the way the world is. There are also instances where police officers do things wrong. They make mistakes. Maybe he shouldn't have kneeled on George Floyd's neck. Maybe they shouldn't have drawn their weapons on a man driving in his car and then panicked. They make mistakes. They must be held accountable for it. And that's when we have actual trials, and we need to make sure it happens. And sometimes officers commit murder. There's a story, I think it was out of North Carolina, where a man who was not particularly in shape was trying to run away from a cop, and he just drew his weapon and shot that man in the back. That's cold blood. That guy went to prison. We must make sure people are held accountable. But when the standard is set so high that even accidental deaths in the course of doing their job, officers are faced with prison. Well, I'm sorry, but the reality is, whether you like that course of action or not, you're going to see a lot of cops say, I don't want to do it. For a lot of these officers, they know that they'll be demonized. They'll eventually become demoralized. But if they go out and they see someone draw a weapon and they decide to defend themselves, they could be facing prison. Why would someone choose to enter that situation? There's body cam footage came out recently. It looks as though a woman had police officers escorting her to her home to protect her from a violent significant other. They were looking for a potential weapon. All of a sudden, this man storms to the front door and just starts firing randomly, apparently at all of them. One officer hits the floor. Why would an officer put themselves in a situation where they could be shot and killed by a bad guy, and where if they do try to defend themselves and actually succeed in doing so, they could face prison time? From February 21st, the Star Tribune, Minneapolis gets much needed approval to hire more cops. Even as they work against the MPD, council members rightly okayed a class of police recruits. They're spending millions of dollars to recruit these police officers. My friends, we're looking at a perfect storm, as I mentioned earlier. You have chaos at 38th in Chicago. Locals reporting gunshots seemingly every day. People being shot, lawlessness. It's primed for an explosion should something go wrong in this trial. And I think the political landscape here right now means nothing will go right with this trial. The settlement has tainted the jury pool. The defense has a real argument now to delay the trial, and apparently the judge is considering it. Maybe at this point, the judge has already said no, we'll see. But I feel like no matter what happens, the riots are going to get bad. With a weakened police force, with an extremely dangerous autonomous zone, clearly armed individuals willing to shoot and take lives and cause damage even to the innocent. What do you think happens when an excuse is given? If Chauvin does not get charged or convicted, and I got to be honest, even if he does, he's not facing first-degree murder. Activists will find a reason to protest. The cover from activists protesting will provide extremists the opportunity to riot. And those who want to engage in lethal force for the sake of some kind of personal gain will use the whole thing as cover as large crowds of people sweep through the city. And then I think we're going to see exactly what we saw last year. I could be wrong. Maybe people are tired. But it's getting warmer. Spring is fast approaching. And a lot of people don't realize that in the winter, things slow down. It's darker out. People don't want to be out. It's colder. It's wetter. For this reason, we often see major protests wane in the winter. It's really amazing how people's convictions disappear as soon as a little water falls from the sky, but that's a fact. I've covered protests, or I used to cover protests very extensively, and I did so for almost a decade, probably about 7 or 8 years. And one thing was true. There could be thousands of people flying into a city prepared to protest, but then the rain hits and they stop. So in the winter, with rain, snow, cold, and humidity, people are less likely to come out. We're entering the spring months and moving into summer. The worst timing for this trial and everything to be happening. Everything is going to come together from the temperature to the weather, the police being weakened, the trial being corrupted. And then I think we're going to see just massive riots. But I'll leave with one final thought. I hope not. I absolutely hope not. All I want is justice. But I don't know what justice looks like. I want the jury to decide. Unfortunately, it seems like no one will be satisfied with whatever the jury does decide. And the scary thing here is the political nature of what's going on. If the jury decides to play politics, if the city decides to play politics, which it seems they are, they could taint the case on purpose. Why? They want Chauvin to be found guilty to prevent more riots. But I don't think it will work. You will live on your knees and the riots will only get worse. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimcastIRL. Come hang out. We take your comments. You can super chat. We'll read some of your comments on the show. It'll be a fun discussion. Again, it's at 8 p.m. and we will see you all then.